The security guard's hand was already on Catherine's arm when the first twin started crying. "Ma'am, you need to leave. Now." His grip tightened, fingers digging into her exhausted flesh. Behind him, 3 more guards formed a wall of Navy uniforms and cold authority. Beyond them, through the glass doors of Riverside Memorial Hospital's maternity wing, Catherine could see other new mothers being wheeled to their cars by smiling nurses. None of them were black. None of them were being thrown out 6 hours after giving birth. Catherine clutched Zara closer to her chest, the newborn's wails piercing through the antiseptic air. In the hospital-issue carrier beside her feet, Karen screamed in harmony with her sister. The twins were 4 hours old. 4 hours into their lives, and already the world was teaching them they weren't welcome. "Please," Catherine whispered, hating how her voice cracked. "My husband, Marcus, is coming. He went to get the car seats from—" "Your husband isn't on the approved family list." The guard's voice was mechanical, rehearsed. How many times had he done this? How many other black women had he dragged from these pristine halls? "Hospital policy states that without proper documentation and insurance verification, we cannot—" "I showed you my insurance card!" Catherine's exhaustion shattered into fury. She'd been awake for 32 hours. Her body felt like it had been torn apart and badly stitched back together. Blood was still seeping through the pads the nurses had given her. "You people approved me when I checked in." "That was before we realized the irregularities in your paperwork." Irregularities. The word hung in the air like a noose. Catherine knew exactly what that meant. She'd seen the way the intake nurse's smile had frozen when Marcus walked in, tall, dark-skinned, with locks that fell past his shoulders. She'd watched the woman's eyes travel from Marcus to Catherine to the wedding ring on Catherine's finger, and seen the moment the nurse decided there must be some mistake. Some fraud. Some welfare scam. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps us connect with our amazing community. And believe me, the story you're about to hear could happen to anyone. Because how could a black man and his black wife possibly afford Riverside Memorial's premium maternity wing? "My paperwork is perfect," Catherine said through gritted teeth. "My husband is a software engineer at—" "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice." The guard took a step closer. His hand moved toward the radio on his belt. Behind him, Catherine saw a white woman in a pink robe glance over, then quickly look away. Safer not to see. Safer not to know. Zara's cries were becoming desperate now, the newborn's face reddening with hunger and confusion. Catherine needed to feed her, needed to sit down before her legs gave out, needed to find Marcus before these men put their hands on her again. Where was Marcus? He'd left 20 minutes ago. Just 20 minutes to run to the parking garage and grab the car seats from their SUV. He should have been back by now, unless they'd stopped him too. The thought sent ice through Catherine's veins. Marcus was protective, loving, and, when his family was threatened, prone to the kind of righteous anger that made white people reach for their phones to call the police. If security had confronted him in that parking garage, if they'd put hands on him the way they were about to put hands on her. "I'm calling the police," the guard said, pulling out his radio. "For what?" Catherine's voice rose despite herself. "For having a baby? For being black in your hospital? For trespassing and creating a disturbance?" "I'm a patient. I gave birth here. My daughters were born in room 437 5 hours ago." But even as she said it, Catherine knew it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Not her insurance, not her paperwork, not the fact that she and Marcus had paid for this stay in full before she'd even gone into labor. The only thing that mattered was the color of her skin and the assumption that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly belong in a place like this. The guard reached for her arm again. Catherine jerked back, and the movement sent a spike of agony through her core. She gasped, stumbling, and for one terrible moment she thought she might drop Zara. The baby's screams intensified. "Don't touch me," Catherine managed. "Don't you dare!" "Catherine!" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He burst through the hallway doors, car seats dangling from both hands, his face a mask of controlled fury. Two security guards were right behind him, trying to grab his shoulders, but Marcus was already moving toward his wife with the kind of single-minded purpose that made men twice his size hesitate. "Get your hands off my wife." Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. He set the car seats down with deliberate care, never taking his eyes off the guard whose fingers were still inches from Catherine's arm. "Get your fucking hands away from her." "Sir, you need to calm down." "Calm down." Marcus let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so full of rage. "You're assaulting my wife 6 hours after she gave birth to our daughters, and you want me to calm down?" The hallway had gone silent. Nurses had stopped walking. Other visitors had pressed themselves against walls, phones out, some recording, most just watching. Catherine saw pity in some faces, fear in others, and in too many, that same cold indifference she'd seen all day. The head security guard, an older white man with a face like carved granite, stepped forward. His name tag read Sullivan. "Mr. Reed, we've reviewed your paperwork and there are serious questions about your insurance coverage and your ability to pay for—" "We already paid." Marcus pulled out his phone with sharp, angry movements. "I have the receipt right here. $42,000, paid in full 3 weeks ago. Do you want to see it, or would you rather just admit you're throwing my family out because we're black?" Sullivan's face didn't change. "Sir, if you continue to be aggressive—" "Aggressive?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "I'm aggressive. Not the 4 men surrounding my wife while she's holding our newborn baby. Not the hospital that's trying to evict a woman who can barely stand. I'm the aggressive one." Catherine felt tears burning behind her eyes. She wouldn't cry, wouldn't give these people the satisfaction. But God, she was so tired of fighting. So tired of having to prove again and again that she had a right to exist in spaces like this. Karen's cries had faded to exhausted whimpers. The baby needed to eat, needed to be changed, needed to be somewhere warm and safe, not in a hallway full of hostile men. "Marcus," Catherine said softly, "let's just go. Please." She watched something break in her husband's eyes. He wanted to fight. She could see it in every tense line of his body. But he looked at her, really looked at her, saw the blood seeping through her hospital gown, saw the way she was swaying on her feet, and he nodded. "Fine," Marcus said, voice hollow. "We'll go. But I'm calling my lawyer, and I'm calling every news station in the city, and by tomorrow morning, everyone will know what Riverside Memorial does to black mothers." Sullivan smiled. It was a thin, satisfied smile that told Catherine he'd heard threats like this before. Threats from people who didn't have power, who didn't have connections, who thought justice was something you could demand instead of something you had to buy. "You do that, son," Sullivan said. "Now get out of my hospital." The words hung in the air like a slap. My hospital. As if Sullivan owned it, as if he had the authority to decide who belonged and who didn't based on nothing but the color of their skin. Marcus gathered the car seats, his jaw so tight Catherine could see the muscle jumping. She adjusted Zara in her arms and bent slowly, painfully, to lift Karen's carrier. Every movement felt like her body was tearing apart from the inside. They walked toward the exit in silence. Behind them, the guards followed, making sure they actually left, making sure the black family didn't try to sneak back into spaces where they didn't belong. Catherine's vision was starting to blur. Blood loss, exhaustion, pain. It was all catching up to her now. She felt Marcus's hand on her back, steadying her, guiding her forward. One step, then another. The automatic doors whooshed open, and cold November air hit Catherine's face like a slap. The parking garage was 3 blocks away. Marcus had been forced to park there because the hospital's patient lot had been full, though Catherine had seen plenty of empty spots when they'd arrived. 3 blocks. Catherine had to walk 3 blocks while bleeding, while carrying a newborn, while her body screamed for rest. She made it 2 steps outside before her knees buckled. Marcus caught her, strong arms wrapping around her, and Zara both. "I've got you," he whispered. "Baby, I've got you." But he didn't. Neither of them did. They were standing on the sidewalk outside a hospital that had just thrown them out, with 2 newborn babies and no car, no help, no... A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb in front of them. The car was pristine, elegant, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most people's houses. The windows were tinted so dark Catherine couldn't see inside. For a moment she thought it might be hospital security again, coming to make sure they kept moving, kept walking, kept getting further away from the nice white spaces where they weren't welcome. The back door opened, and Catherine's father stepped out. Catherine's father shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have existed, not the way he looked now, stepping out of that Mercedes in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Not with that cold, calculating expression that Catherine had only seen once before, 15 years ago, when he'd told her mother he was leaving and never coming back. Richard Ashford hadn't been a billionaire then. He'd been a struggling entrepreneur with big dreams and a small family he'd decided was holding him back. Now he was one of the wealthiest men in America, and he was looking at Catherine like she was a problem to be solved. "Get in the car," Richard said. Not hello, not congratulations on the twins. Just a command, delivered in that flat tone that made executives jump and assistants scramble. Catherine's arms tightened around Zara instinctively. The baby had finally stopped crying, exhausted into silence. In the carrier at Catherine's feet, Karen made a small whimpering sound that broke Catherine's heart. "No," Catherine said. Her voice came out weaker than she'd intended. Everything was spinning. She needed to sit down, needed to... "Catherine." Richard's tone didn't change. "You're bleeding through your clothes. Your husband looks like he's about to commit murder. And you have 2 newborns who need proper care. Get in the car." Marcus moved between them, his body language screaming protection. "Who the hell are you?" Richard's eyes flicked to Marcus with the kind of assessment Catherine had seen him use on business proposals. Quick, thorough, calculating value in seconds. "I'm the man who's going to make sure my daughter and granddaughters don't die on a sidewalk because this hospital decided they weren't white enough to deserve basic human decency." The words were blunt, brutal, and completely accurate. Catherine watched Marcus's expression shift as he processed what Richard had said. My daughter. Marcus knew about Richard, knew that Catherine's father had walked out when she was 12 and never looked back, knew that for the past 15 years, Catherine had told everyone her father was dead, because it was easier than explaining that he'd chosen money over his family. But Marcus had never met him, had never seen the way Richard's eyes could go flat and emotionless, like a shark's, had never felt the weight of his attention, the sense that you were being evaluated and found either useful or disposable. "Catherine," Marcus said carefully, "do you want to—" "How did you know?" Catherine interrupted, looking at her father. "How did you know we were here?" Richard pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward her. Catherine saw a news headline. Black couple evicted from Riverside Memorial Maternity Wing. Below it was a photo someone had taken in the hallway. Catherine holding Zara, Marcus arguing with Sullivan, security guards closing in like wolves. The article had been posted 17 minutes ago. Already it had thousands of shares. "I have alerts set for anything involving discrimination at major institutions," Richard said, pocketing his phone. "This came across my desk 8 minutes ago. I recognized you immediately." Something cold settled in Catherine's chest. "You've been tracking me." "I've been aware of you." Richard's correction was precise, clinical. "There's a difference. Now get in the car before you pass out and give these people another photo opportunity." Catherine hated that he was right. Hated that she was swaying on her feet, that her vision kept blurring at the edges, that she needed help, and the only person offering it was the man who'd abandoned her. But Zara was starting to fuss again, and Karen needed to be fed, and Marcus was looking at her with such desperate concern that Catherine knew he'd carry her 3 blocks to the parking garage if she asked him to, and probably collapse from the effort. "Fine," Catherine said, "but we're taking our car seats," and Marcus drives. Richard's expression didn't change, but Catherine saw the slight tightening around his eyes. He wasn't used to being given conditions, wasn't used to people who didn't immediately bend to his will. Good. He could get used to disappointment. Catherine had certainly had enough practice. Richard gestured to his driver, a muscular man in a black suit who'd been standing silently by the Mercedes. "Help them with the car seats." The driver moved with efficient precision, securing both infant seats in the back of the Mercedes while Marcus hovered protectively. Catherine watched through increasingly hazy vision, trying to stay upright, trying not to think about how much blood she was losing, trying not to remember the last time she'd seen her father, when she was 17 and he'd shown up at her high school graduation with a check for $50,000 and no apology. She'd torn up the check and thrown it in his face. She wondered if he remembered that, wondered if he cared. "Ma'am?" The driver was standing beside her, professional concern in his voice. "Let me help you into the vehicle." Catherine wanted to refuse, wanted to hold on to her pride, her anger, her righteous fury at everything that had happened in the last hour. But Zara was getting heavier in her arms, and her legs were shaking, and the world tilted. Strong hands caught her before she hit the pavement. Not the driver's hands, Marcus's. Her husband was there, always there, taking Zara with gentle expertise and passing their daughter to the driver, then lifting Catherine like she weighed nothing. "I've got you," Marcus whispered again, carrying her to the Mercedes. "Always." Catherine let her head rest against his chest and heard his heartbeat, fast and frightened beneath his coat. He was terrified. She could feel it in the tension of his arms, the way his breathing had gone shallow. He'd almost lost her. They'd almost lost everything. Marcus settled her into the Mercedes's leather back seat, then took Zara from the driver and secured her in one of the car seats. His hands were shaking slightly as he buckled the straps. On the other side, the driver was doing the same with Karen, movements gentle despite his intimidating appearance. Richard climbed into the front passenger seat. He didn't look back at Catherine, just pulled out his phone and started making calls. "David? It's Richard Ashford. I need you to do something for me. Riverside Memorial Hospital." "Yes, that Riverside Memorial. I want a full investigation into their patient discrimination practices, and I want it done publicly." A pause. "I don't care if they're donors. I want their medical license reviewed. I want their insurance premiums to skyrocket. I want every board member to wake up tomorrow morning facing a lawsuit." Another pause. "Good. And David? Make it messy." He ended the call and immediately started another. "Senator Morrison. Richard Ashford. I'm calling in that favor you owe me. I need emergency legislation introduced regarding racial discrimination in healthcare settings." His voice was cold, methodical, discussing Catherine's trauma like it was a business transaction, which to him it probably was. Marcus climbed into the driver's seat, his jaw tight. "Where are we going?" "Presbyterian Heights Medical Center," Richard said without looking up from his phone. "Top floor, private wing. I've already called ahead. They're expecting you." "We can't afford," Marcus started. "You're not paying." Richard's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "Drive. Your wife needs a transfusion." Catherine wanted to argue, wanted to tell her father that they didn't need his money, his power, his sudden interest in grandchildren he'd never bothered to acknowledge. But the word transfusion cut through her pride like a knife. Was she really that bad? She'd known she was bleeding, but How do you know I need a transfusion? Catherine's voice came out slurred. When had that happened? Richard finally turned to look at her. His expression was unreadable. Because you have your mother's complexion, and right now you're 3 shades too pale, because I can smell the blood from here. And because if we don't get you to a hospital in the next 15 minutes, you're going to die in this car. The bluntness of it shocked Catherine into silence. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. We're going. He pulled out of the hospital's circular driveway with controlled speed, not quite reckless, but close. The Mercedes handled like a dream, smooth and powerful, nothing like their aging SUV. Catherine's head was getting heavier. She wanted to sleep. Just close her eyes for a minute. Just rest. Catherine, Richard's voice cut through the fog. Stay awake. Look at your daughters. Keep your eyes open. She didn't want to take orders from him, didn't want to give him the satisfaction. But when she looked at Zara and Karen in their car seats, both sleeping now, peaceful and perfect and new, something fierce sparked in her chest. Stay awake. They need you. Tell me about them, Richard said, still not looking at her. He was scrolling through his phone, but Catherine could hear the tension in his voice. Their names. Zara and Karen, Catherine said. Each word felt heavy. Zara means princess. Karen means eternal. Good names. We didn't name them for you. I know. Something flickered across Richard's face. Regret? No. Richard Ashford didn't do regret. But they're still my granddaughters. And no one, no hospital, no security guard, no racist piece of shit administrator is going to treat my family like that and walk away unscathed. My family. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Marcus was weaving through traffic now. The GPS showing Presbyterian Heights was 8 minutes away. 8 minutes. Catherine could last 8 minutes. She had to. Why now? The question escaped before Catherine could stop it. 15 years. Radio silence. And now you show up? Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I was a coward when I left. Told myself I was choosing success over mediocrity. Told myself your mother was holding me back, that you'd be better off without a father who resented his own family. He paused. I was wrong. But by the time I realized it, you'd made it clear you didn't want me in your life. So I stayed away. You stayed away because it was easier, Catherine said. The words came out harsh, bitter. Good. Because the great Richard Ashford doesn't do messy, doesn't do complicated, doesn't do family unless it looks good in a press release. You're right. The admission surprised her. I don't do messy. I solve problems. I fix things. And maybe that makes me a terrible father, but... He finally turned to look at her fully, and Catherine saw something in his eyes she'd never expected. Fear. But I will burn that hospital to the ground before I let them get away with what they did to you. The Mercedes pulled up to Presbyterian Heights' private entrance. Before Marcus had even put the car in park, nurses were running toward them with a wheelchair and a gurney. Someone, Richard, had called ahead with enough detail that they knew exactly what they were dealing with. Postpartum hemorrhage, one nurse was already saying into a radio. Alert OR, get Dr. Chen down here now. Hands were reaching for Catherine, gentle but urgent. Someone was taking Zara from her car seat. Someone else was lifting Catherine onto the gurney. Marcus was beside her, holding her hand, his face a mask of terror. Sir, you'll need to wait in... I'm staying with my wife. Marcus's voice left no room for argument. And my granddaughters will be in the best pediatric suite you have, Richard said, stepping out of the Mercedes. His presence seemed to fill the entire entrance. Is Dr. Patel on duty? Yes, Mr. Ashford. Good. Get him for the twins. And have your administrator meet me in the executive wing. We need to discuss payment and privacy protocols." They were moving fast now, the gurney wheels squeaking against polished floors. Catherine caught glimpses of Presbyterian heights as they rushed through, marble lobbies, original artwork, the kind of quiet luxury that whispered money instead of shouting it. "Catherine!" Marcus was running beside the gurney, still holding her hand. "Stay with me, please. Our daughters need their mother. I need you. Stay." She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But the world was getting darker at the edges, and it was so hard to keep her eyes open. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was her father, phone pressed to his ear, saying in that cold, deadly voice, "I want the names of every person involved, security guards, administrators, the CEO, and find out who owns Riverside Memorial's parent company. I want to buy it." Then nothing. 24 hours later, Catherine woke up in a room that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a view of the city skyline. There were fresh flowers on every surface. The beeping of monitors was somehow softer here, less invasive. And Marcus was asleep in a chair beside her bed, their daughters in bassinets on either side of him, one hand resting protectively on each bassinet. Catherine's body ached, but the dizzy, bleeding-to-death feeling was gone. She looked down at her arm and saw the IV, the bags of fluids and blood that had apparently saved her life. How much blood had she lost? How close had she come to leaving her daughters motherless? A soft knock on the door made Marcus jerk awake. He looked at Catherine, and relief flooded his face so completely that Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey yourself." He was beside her in an instant, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her hands. "Don't ever scare me like that again. Do you understand? Never again." "I'll try." Catherine smiled weakly. "The girls?" "Perfect. Healthy. Dr. Patel checked them 3 times already. They're just hungry little things who keep demanding to be fed every 2 hours." As if on cue, Zara started fussing. Marcus lifted her with practiced ease and brought her to Catherine. The baby latched immediately, and Catherine felt that fierce, overwhelming love that she'd felt from the moment she'd first held her daughters. "Your father's been here all night," Marcus said quietly. "Made about 100 phone calls. Threatened half the city. Scared the shit out of the hospital administrator." "Where is he?" "Conference room down the hall. Apparently he's in the middle of purchasing Riverside Memorial's entire parent company." Marcus's expression was complicated. "Catherine, I know your history with him is difficult. But he might have saved your life last night. If we'd tried to walk to the garage, if we'd driven to a different hospital." "I know." Catherine did know, hated knowing. "I'll talk to him." But before she could say anything else, her father walked through the door. Richard looked different than he had the day before. He was wearing the same clothes, which meant he hadn't gone home. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose. He looked, and Catherine could hardly believe she was thinking this. He looked like a father who'd spent all night worrying about his daughter. "You're awake," Richard said. Relief flickered across his face before his usual mask slammed back into place. "Good. The doctor said you lost 3 liters of blood. Another 15 minutes and—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "You're going to be fine." "Thank you," Catherine said. The words felt strange in her mouth. She hadn't thanked her father for anything in 15 years. For yesterday, for this, for all of it. Richard nodded stiffly. Then he pulled out his phone and set it on the table beside Catherine's bed. On the screen was a news article with the headline, "Billionaire Richard Ashford purchases Riverside Memorial Parent Company after daughter's discriminatory treatment." Below it was another article, Riverside Memorial CEO fired, entire security team terminated. And another, federal investigation launched into Riverside Memorial's patient discrimination. Messy enough for you? Richard asked, the ghost of a smile on his lips. Catherine stared at the articles. Her father had done this. All of it. In less than 24 hours, he'd destroyed the people who'd hurt her and bought the entire hospital system just to make sure it never happened again. It was excessive. It was probably vindictive. It was what she'd needed someone to do for her. What she'd needed but never thought she'd have. Why? Catherine asked. Why now, after all these years? Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to Zara's bassinet and looked down at his sleeping granddaughter. His expression softened in a way Catherine had never seen. Because I failed you, he said quietly. I chose building an empire over being your father. I told myself it was the right choice, the logical choice, that you'd understand someday. He looked up at Catherine. But when I saw that photo of you being thrown out of that hospital, holding your newborn daughter, looking so much like your mother did when you were born, I realized I'd been lying to myself for 15 years. He reached down and gently touched Zara's tiny hand with one finger. I can't fix what I did to you, Richard continued. Can't give you back the childhood I stole or the father you deserved, but I can make damn sure your daughters never feel the way you felt yesterday. I can make sure they grow up in a world where people think twice before treating them as less than. Catherine felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She'd sworn she wouldn't cry in front of him, wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But these weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of relief. I'm still angry at you, Catherine said. Good. Richard's smile was sad. You should be. I deserve that, and more. And I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand. But... Catherine looked at her daughters, at Marcus, at the father who'd abandoned her, and then moved heaven and earth to protect her when she'd needed it most. But you can visit. Get to know your granddaughters. Try to be better. Richard's eyes were suspiciously bright. I'd like that. Marcus stood, still holding Zara, and extended his free hand to Richard. Marcus Reed, we should probably be properly introduced since you're buying hospitals for us. Richard shook his hand. Richard Ashford, and I'm not buying hospitals for you. I'm buying them so I can burn their discriminatory practices to the ground and rebuild them properly. Same thing. Not at all. One is generosity, the other is revenge. Richard's smile turned sharp. I'm much better at revenge. There was a knock on the door, and a nurse peeked in. Mr. Ashford, the Riverside board members are here for the emergency meeting you called. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Richard turned back to Catherine. I have to go fire some people and restructure an entire hospital system, but I'll be back this evening, with dinner, real dinner, not hospital food. He paused at the door. Catherine, your mother would be proud of you, of the woman you've become, of the mother you already are. His voice cracked slightly. I know I have no right to say this, but I'm proud of you too. Then he was gone, leaving Catherine with her husband, her daughters, and the complicated, messy reality of second chances. Outside the window, the city gleamed in the morning light. Somewhere across town, board members were about to lose their jobs. Policies were being rewritten. A hospital was being torn apart and rebuilt by a man who'd learned, 15 years too late, what really mattered. Karen started fussing, and Marcus brought her to Catherine. As both twins nursed, as Marcus sat beside her and traced gentle patterns on her shoulder, Catherine realized something. She'd spent 15 years believing she didn't need her father, believing that needing him was weakness, that wanting him in her life was betrayal of the girl he'd abandoned. But maybe it wasn't weakness to accept help. Maybe it wasn't betrayal to give second chances. Maybe it was just being human. And maybe, just maybe, the man who'd chosen money over family 15 years ago could learn to choose differently now. Only time would tell. 3 months later, Catherine stood in the nursery of their new home and wondered if she was dreaming. The room was painted in soft sage green with cream accents. 2 cribs stood against the far wall, custom-made with intricate carvings of protective symbols from both Marcus's Jamaican heritage and Catherine's own family history. A rocking chair sat by the window, not just any rocking chair, but the one Catherine's grandmother had used, the one she'd thought was lost forever when her mother's house had been sold years ago. Richard had found it, tracked it down through 3 different estate sales, and paid an obscene amount of money to get it back. It was one of many things he'd done that Catherine didn't know how to feel about. "You're thinking too hard again." Marcus appeared in the doorway, Zara draped over his shoulder, her tiny hand fisted in his shirt. "I can hear your brain spinning from downstairs." Catherine smiled despite herself. "Can you blame me? 6 months ago, we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment and saving every penny for the twins. Now we're in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with a nursery that looks like something out of a magazine. Your father didn't buy us this house." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. He'd been saying this for weeks, every time Catherine's guilt spiraled. "We bought this house with the settlement money from Riverside Memorial's discrimination lawsuit. Money we earned by surviving what they put us through." He was right. The lawsuit had settled for an amount that made Catherine's head spin. $8 million split between them and the dozen other families who'd come forward with similar stories after the news broke. Stories of black mothers denied pain medication, of Hispanic families charged double for the same services, of Asian patients told their insurance looked fraudulent, despite being perfectly legitimate. Riverside Memorial had been a systemic problem, and Richard's scorched earth approach had exposed all of it. But Richard had done more than just expose it. He'd bought the entire parent company, fired everyone involved, and spent the last 3 months implementing new policies across all 43 hospitals in the network. Mandatory bias training, diverse hiring practices, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination backed by immediate termination and legal action. Catherine's trauma had become a catalyst for change that would affect millions of patients. She still didn't know how to feel about that either. Karen started crying from the other room, the angry, demanding cry that meant she was hungry and wanted everyone to know it. Marcus laughed and handed Zara to Catherine. "Your turn. I've got Hurricane Karen." Catherine settled into the grandmother's rocking chair and began nursing Zara. Through the window she could see their backyard, a sprawling space with old oak trees and a garden that Marcus had already started planning. Beyond that, the neighbors' houses were visible, a mix of families from different backgrounds all living in this diverse suburb that Catherine and Marcus had specifically chosen. They'd wanted their daughters to grow up seeing people who looked like them, wanted them to feel normal, accepted, safe. Whether that was possible in America was still an open question. But they were trying. Her phone buzzed on the changing table. Catherine shifted Zara carefully and reached for it, expecting a message from Marcus, or maybe her father with his daily check-in text that she still found both touching and overwhelming. Instead, it was a news alert. Richard Ashford announces $500 million fund for maternal health equity. Catherine's breath caught. She clicked the article and read, "Billionaire Richard Ashford announced today the creation of the Catherine Reed Foundation for Maternal Health Equity, a $500 million initiative dedicated to eliminating racial disparities in maternal health care. The foundation, named after Ashford's daughter who experienced discriminatory treatment at Riverside Memorial Hospital earlier this year, will provide grants to hospitals implementing bias reduction programs, fund research into maternal health outcomes for women of color, and offer legal support to families facing discrimination. My daughter almost died because a hospital decided the color of her skin mattered more than her humanity," Ashford said at the press conference. That should never happen to anyone. This foundation will ensure it happens to fewer people, and when it does happen, those families will have the resources to fight back. There was a photo accompanying the article. Richard at a podium, looking stern and powerful. And beside him, blown up on a massive screen, was a picture Catherine had never seen before. Herself at age 7, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, held in her father's arms. He'd kept that photo. All these years, through the divorce and the distance and the 15 years of silence, he'd kept it. Catherine felt tears burning behind her eyes for what felt like the 100th time since that night at Riverside. She'd cried more in the past 3 months than she had in the past 3 years. Hormones, the doctor had said. Postpartum adjustment. Trauma processing. Maybe. Or maybe she was finally letting herself feel things she'd locked away for too long. Catherine? Marcus was back, Karen now calm against his chest. His expression shifted when he saw her face. What happened? What's wrong? She handed him the phone wordlessly. Marcus read the article, his eyebrows climbing higher with each paragraph. When he finished, he let out a low whistle. $500 million. He named it after you. He should have asked first. But even as Catherine said it, she knew it was a weak protest. This was who Richard Ashford was, a man who made decisions and moved forward without asking permission, who believed his way was the right way and had enough money and power to make it happen regardless of what anyone else thought. It was infuriating. It was overwhelming. It was also going to save lives. Are you angry? Marcus asked carefully. Catherine looked down at Zara, who had fallen asleep nursing, her tiny mouth still making little sucking motions. She thought about the young black mother who might walk into a hospital next year and be treated with respect because of bias training funded by this foundation. The Hispanic woman who would know her rights because of legal resources provided by this initiative. The Asian family who wouldn't have to fight alone because there was now an organization backing them. No, Catherine said finally. I'm not angry, I don't know what I am. Her phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. Catherine answered. You should have asked me first. If I'd asked, you would have said no. Richard's voice was matter-of-fact. You would have said it was too much, that you didn't want your name on something so public, that you weren't comfortable being the face of maternal health equity. He was absolutely right, which was annoying. So you just decided for me? I decided to use my resources to make sure what happened to you happens to fewer people. The name is secondary. If you truly hate it, I'll change it. He paused. But Catherine, you almost died. Your daughters almost lost their mother. And the only reason you didn't die is because I had the money and connections to get you to a better hospital fast enough. Most people don't have that. Most people in your situation would have bled out on that sidewalk or in their car on the way to an underfunded emergency room. Catherine's throat tightened. She knew he was right. Had known it from the moment she'd woken up in that luxury hospital suite and realized how close she'd come to never waking up at all. I saw Dr. Chen yesterday, Richard continued, the doctor who treated you. She told me that maternal mortality rates for black women are 3 times higher than for white women. 3 times, Catherine. And it's not because of biology or poverty or any of the other explanations people try to hide behind. It's because of bias. Because hospitals see black women in pain and don't believe them, see them bleeding and don't rush, see them dying and don't care enough to save them. I know. Catherine's voice came out as a whisper. So let me do this. Let me use what I built, the empire I chose over you 15 years ago, to at least try to fix some of the broken systems that almost took you from me all over again. Let me be useful. There was something raw in his voice, something vulnerable that Catherine had never heard before. Richard Ashford, billionaire extraordinaire, asking permission, asking to be allowed to help.
When had their relationship shifted like this? When had the man who'd abandoned her become someone whose opinion she valued, whose presence she'd started to expect, and even welcome? "Okay," Catherine said. "Keep the name. But I want input on how the money is spent. I want to talk to the families who receive grants. And I want to be involved, not just a name on a foundation." "Done." Relief flooded Richard's voice.
I've already scheduled a meeting with the foundation board for next week. I'll have my assistant send you the details. A pause. And Catherine, thank you. For what? For giving me a second chance I don't deserve. Before Catherine could respond, he'd ended the call. Classic Richard. Emotional vulnerability for 30 seconds, then retreat back into efficiency and business. But it was more than he'd given her in 15 years. It was progress. Marcus sat down on the floor beside the rocking chair, Karen now sleeping peacefully in his arms. "So we're doing this? Becoming the face of maternal health equity?" "I don't think we have a choice." Catherine smiled wryly. "Richard Ashford has decided to adopt us as his cause, and when a billionaire decides something, it tends to happen whether you want it to or not." True. Marcus reached up and took her free hand. "But for what it's worth, I think you'll be good at it. You're angry enough to push for real change and compassionate enough to remember that behind every statistic is a real person." "You think I'm angry?" "Baby, you've been angry since the moment those security guards put their hands on you. You just channel it into productive things now, instead of letting it eat you alive." He squeezed her hand. "It's one of the things I love about you." Catherine leaned down and kissed him, careful not to wake Zara. "What would I do without you?" "Good thing you'll never have to find out." The foundation meeting the following week was held in Richard's downtown headquarters, in a conference room that had windows overlooking the entire city. Catherine had been to her father's office exactly once before, for that terrible meeting when she was 17 where he'd tried to buy her forgiveness. Now she was back, but everything was different. The conference table was full of people, doctors, lawyers, activists, researchers. All of them turned to look at Catherine when she walked in, Zara strapped to her chest in a baby carrier while Marcus followed with Karen. Ms. Reed, a black woman in her 60s, stood and extended her hand. "Dr. Valerie Simpson, I'm the Director of Maternal Health Equity at Johns Hopkins. Your father asked me to help structure this foundation, and I have to tell you, what happened to you has already changed hospital policies across the country. Thank you for being brave enough to let your story be told." Catherine shook her hand, feeling surreal. "I didn't really have a choice. It got posted online before I even woke up from surgery." Dr. Simpson smiled. "Sometimes the most important revolutions start without our permission. The question is what we do once they've begun." Richard appeared at Catherine's elbow. "Catherine, Marcus, please sit. We have a lot to cover." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of presentations, data, and proposed initiatives. Catherine learned that the foundation would fund implicit bias training for 10,000 healthcare workers in the first year, legal defense funds for families facing discrimination, research grants studying racial disparities in maternal outcomes, community health programs in underserved areas, scholarship programs for Black and brown medical students. The numbers were staggering. The scope was massive. And Catherine's story was at the center of all of it. "We want to launch a public awareness campaign," one of the marketing consultants was saying, "using your experience as a way to educate people about the reality of maternal health disparities. If you're comfortable, we'd like to do video interviews, maybe some print pieces." "No." Catherine's voice cut through the presentation. Everyone turned to look at her. "No videos of me in that hospital hallway. No recreations of the worst day of my life. If you want to use my story, fine, but I won't be reduced to trauma porn for a marketing campaign." The room went silent.
The consultant looked panicked, glancing at Richard as if expecting him to override his daughter. Richard just smiled. You heard her. Find another approach. Dr. Simpson leaned forward. What would you be comfortable with? Catherine. Catherine adjusted Zara in the carrier, thinking. What did she want people to know? What message actually mattered? I want people to understand that this isn't about one bad hospital or a few racist security guards, Catherine said slowly. It's systemic. It's the doctor who doesn't believe a black woman when she says her pain is a 10 out of 10. It's the nurse who takes twice as long to respond to a call button. It's the hospital administrator who sees a black name on insurance paperwork and immediately assumes fraud. It's 1,000 tiny cuts that add up to dead mothers and traumatized families. She looked around the table at all these powerful, educated people who had the resources to actually make change. So don't make this about me. Make it about the next black mother who walks into a hospital scared and in pain. Make it about ensuring she gets the same care, the same respect, the same benefit of the doubt that white mothers get automatically. Make it about saving lives, not telling my story. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Simpson started clapping. Others joined in until the entire conference room was applauding. Richard was watching her with an expression Catherine couldn't quite read. Pride? Regret? Maybe both. When the meeting finally ended, Richard asked Catherine to stay behind. Marcus took both twins to the building's lobby, leaving father and daughter alone in the conference room with the city spread out below them. You were right to push back on the marketing campaign, Richard said. I should have thought about that before letting them present it. Should have protected you better. You can't protect me from everything. Catherine joined him at the window. And I don't need you to. I just need you to listen when I tell you what I'm comfortable with. I'm still learning how to do that. Richard's reflection in the glass looked tired. Listening. Asking permission. Being a father instead of a CEO. You're getting better at it. Am I? He turned to face her. Because most days I feel like I'm just making expensive mistakes and hoping money can fix what I broke 15 years ago. Catherine studied her father. This man who'd abandoned her, then saved her, then built an entire foundation in her name without asking. He was complicated, flawed, trying in his own dysfunctional way to make amends for the unforgivable. And somehow, against all logic and all her protective instincts, Catherine was starting to forgive him. Not completely, not enough to forget or excuse what he'd done, but enough to see him as human rather than villain. Enough to acknowledge that people could change, even if the change came too late to fix everything they'd broken. You can't fix what you broke, Catherine said. That little girl who needed her father, she's gone. I grew up without you, and nothing you do now will give me back those years. Richard's face fell, but Catherine wasn't finished. But you can be here now, for Zara and Karen, for the grandchildren who don't carry any of that history. You can be the grandfather you weren't a father. You can teach them about business and power and how to navigate a world that will judge them for their skin color before it ever sees their character. She stepped closer to him. And you can work with me on this foundation, really work with me, not just throw money at problems and expect them to disappear. You can use what you built to tear down the systems that almost killed me and do kill hundreds of black mothers every year. You can be useful. It was the same word Richard had used on the phone. Let me be useful. Richard's eyes were bright. I can do that. I want to do that. Good. Catherine pulled out her phone and brought up her calendar. Then let's start with dinner. Every Sunday. You, me, Marcus, and the girls. No business talk, no foundation planning, just family. Family, Richard repeated, testing the word. I'd like that. They stood together at the window, watching the city move below. Somewhere out there, pregnant women were walking into hospitals. Some would be treated with compassion. Others would face the same discrimination Catherine had encountered.
But because of the foundation, because of the policies Richard had implemented, because Catherine had survived to tell her story, a few more would walk out safely than would have otherwise. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough. But it was something, and sometimes something was all you could build from the wreckage. 1 year later, the Catherine Reed Foundation's first annual gala was held in the ballroom of the Grandview Hotel, with 500 guests in attendance and donations pouring in from across the country. Catherine stood at the podium in a midnight blue gown, her natural hair in an elegant updo that had taken Marcus 3 YouTube tutorials to help her achieve, and looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that crowd were the doctors who'd treated her at Presbyterian Heights, the lawyers who'd taken on Riverside Memorial, the activists who'd been fighting maternal health disparities for decades before Catherine's story went viral. And front and center, at a table decorated with photos of Zara and Karen, sat Marcus and Richard, her husband and her father, the 2 men who'd saved her life in different ways. "A year ago," Catherine began, "I almost died because a hospital decided I didn't deserve basic human dignity, because security guards looked at my black face and my newborn black daughters and saw problems instead of patients. Because the system is broken, and breaking people, breaking mothers, is what broken systems do." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But I didn't die. I'm standing here because I had resources most people don't have. I had a husband who fought for me. I had a father with the money and power to get me to a better hospital. I had luck." Her voice grew stronger. "Most black mothers don't have luck. They have statistics. They have a maternal mortality rate 3 times higher than white mothers. They have doctors who don't believe their pain and hospitals that provide substandard care and a system that has decided their lives are worth less." Catherine looked directly at the cameras recording the speech for the Foundation's website. "This foundation exists because luck shouldn't be required to survive childbirth. Because every mother, black, brown, white, Asian, indigenous, immigrant, deserves to hold her babies and watch them grow. Because the color of your skin should never, ever determine whether you live or die." The room erupted in applause. Catherine saw Richard stand, then Marcus, then the entire room rising to their feet. She saw tears on faces, determination, anger, hope. She saw change happening. After the speech, after the dinner and the silent auction and the networking, Catherine found herself on the hotel's rooftop terrace with Marcus. The twins were with a babysitter, Richard's gift for the evening, a trained nurse he'd hired specifically so Catherine and Marcus could have one night to themselves. "You were incredible up there," Marcus said, pulling Catherine close. "The way you spoke, it reminded me why I fell in love with you. That fire, that refusal to accept injustice. I learned it from watching you." Catherine rested her head on his shoulder. "You were ready to fight an entire hospital for me. Always." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Though I'm glad your father showed up with his attack lawyers and unlimited resources. I was about 30 seconds from getting arrested for assault." Catherine laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace. Below them, the city glittered. Somewhere out there, a woman was going into labor. Somewhere, a family was being born. Somewhere, hopefully, a black mother was being treated with the respect and care she deserved because of the work this foundation was doing. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if my father hadn't shown up?" Catherine asked quietly. "If we'd tried to walk to the garage, if I'd kept bleeding?" "Every day." Marcus's arms tightened around her. "And every day I'm grateful that I don't have to live in that reality, that our daughters have their mother, that we get to do this together." The terrace door opened and Richard stepped out. He paused when he saw them, as if unsure whether to intrude. "Come here, Dad," Catherine called. The word still felt strange on her tongue. Dad, but less strange than it had 6 months ago, or 3 months ago, or even yesterday. She was getting used to having a father again. Richard joined them at the railing. The foundation raised $2.3 million tonight. That's on top of the initial endowment. We'll be able to fund 50 hospital programs instead of 30, provide legal support for hundreds of families instead of dozens. That's amazing, Catherine said, and meant it. They stood together in comfortable silence, 3 people bound by trauma and blood and the complicated work of building something from the wreckage of the past. Zara and Karen would grow up knowing their grandfather, would grow up in a world that was still broken, but maybe, just maybe, slightly less broken than the one Catherine had been born into, would grow up with parents who fought for them, and a foundation bearing their mother's name that fought for others. It wasn't the fairy tale ending where everything was fixed and forgiven. But it was real. It was progress. It was family, messy and complicated and imperfect, but family nonetheless. And sometimes, Catherine thought as she stood between her husband and her father under the stars, that was enough. 5 years later. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Catherine was in her home office, reviewing grant applications for the foundation, when Marcus brought in the mail. Most of it was junk: credit card offers, grocery store flyers, donation requests from charities that had gotten her name off some list. But one envelope was different. Heavy cream paper, hand-addressed. No return address. Catherine opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a young black woman holding a newborn baby, both of them smiling in a hospital room that looked clean and modern. The woman wore a hospital gown, but there was no fear in her eyes, no trauma, just joy. The note read, "Dear Ms. Reed, 5 years ago, I was pregnant with my first child when your story came out. I was terrified. I'd heard the statistics about black maternal mortality, had heard stories from my own mother and aunts about being ignored in hospitals, about pain medication being denied, about being treated like criminals instead of patients. I almost canceled my hospital birth and tried to have my baby at home, even though that came with its own risks. But then I heard about the Catherine Reed Foundation, about the hospitals you'd worked with to implement new policies, about the legal protections for families facing discrimination, about the bias training for medical staff. I chose a hospital that had gone through your program, and when I went into labor, I was treated with respect, with compassion. When I said I was in pain, they believed me. When I asked for an epidural, they didn't make me beg. When complications arose, they moved quickly and saved my life. My daughter is 4 years old now. Her name is Catherine. I named her after you because you're the reason I'm alive to watch her grow. Thank you for turning your trauma into something that saves lives. Thank you for fighting so that other mothers don't have to. With infinite gratitude, Jasmine Washington. Catherine read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Marcus found her like that, crying in her office, clutching a letter from a stranger who'd named her daughter Catherine. Another one? Marcus asked gently. It wasn't the first letter like this, wasn't even the 10th. The foundation received hundreds of stories from families whose lives had been changed by the work they were doing. But each one still hit Catherine right in the chest. Each one reminded her why the trauma had been worth it. Her daughter is named Catherine, she whispered. Marcus read the letter over her shoulder, then wrapped his arms around his wife. You did that. You saved her. We did that, Catherine corrected. You, me, my father, Dr. Simpson, everyone who's worked on the foundation. We're saving them. From downstairs came the sound of chaos. Zara and Karen arguing over a toy, their voices high and indignant. They were 5 years old now, brilliant and stubborn and so full of life it took Catherine's breath away sometimes. They would grow up knowing their mother had almost died bringing them into the world. would know about Riverside Memorial and the security guards and the systematic discrimination that almost made them motherless. But they would also grow up knowing their mother had fought back, had turned that trauma into a foundation that had saved hundreds of lives and changed hospital policies across the nation. Would know that their grandfather, the man they called Grandpa Richard and who spoiled them ruthlessly, had used his power and money to tear down systems that hurt people who looked like them. Would know that their parents loved them enough to burn the world down and rebuild it better. "Mom!" Zara's voice carried up the stairs. "Karen took my book! It's my book!" Karen shrieked back. Catherine laughed through her tears and stood. "Duty calls." Marcus caught her hand before she could leave. "I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm so fucking grateful you're still here." "Me too," Catherine said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. She walked downstairs to mediate the twin war. The letter from Jasmine Washington still clutched in her hand. She would add it to the box in her closet where she kept all the letters from mothers who'd survived because of the foundation. On bad days, when the trauma came back in nightmares or panic attacks, when she remembered the feeling of being thrown out of a hospital while bleeding, when she wondered if any of it had been worth it, she would read these letters, and she would remember. Yes, it was worth it. Every painful moment, every public speech, every time she had to relive the worst day of her life to educate people about maternal health disparities. It was worth it because Jasmine Washington was alive, because little Catherine Washington was growing up with her mother, because hundreds of other women had walked into hospitals and received the care they deserved. The world was still broken. Black maternal mortality rates were still too high. The fight was far from over, but they were winning. Slowly, painfully, one saved life at a time, they were winning. And Catherine Reed would keep fighting until every mother, regardless of skin color, had the same chance to hold her babies and watch them grow. That was a promise worth keeping.